Okay, welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce your speaker, John Follis, who's President and Creative Director of Follis, Inc. John founded Follis, Inc. in 1993 after his previous Madison Avenue agency, Follis, DeVito, Verdi, became the second most awarded agency in New York. Follis campaigns have been covered in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Time, Forbes, the Harvard Business Review, and the Prentice Hall College text, Principles of Marketing. So join me in welcoming John.
As Alex said, I spent my career mostly in New York. One of the agencies I worked for was one of the top agencies in the country. It was called Doyle, Dane, Bernbach. And the founder of that agency was a guy named Bill Bernbach, whose quote I stumbled on when I was in my mid-20s. And it was one of the things that really got me thinking about doing public service. And I want to share that quote with you. The advertising people in this country are the most skilled communicators in history. It would be a major step toward solving human problems if we would use our skills to help persuade people everywhere to value one another. Imagine the difference it would make. That quote really resonated with me, and I've continued to keep that in mind throughout my career and beyond. So today I'm going to be showing examples of various advertising efforts. The thing I learned in my advertising career is that there are major foundations to the success of any marketing effort, starting with the right strategy. Of course, you have to have the right message and the right media channel, but also what's very important, because none of these will mean anything if you don't get people's attention. And the best way to get people's attention is to do something creative. And when I say creative, I just don't mean pretty pictures and things like that, fancy colors. I mean something that is in sync with everything I just mentioned previous to creative. So as I mentioned, I got involved in a fundraiser when I moved to Stanford a few years ago. And the fundraiser was to raise funds for a park. And in order to do that, one of the people on the committee was able to get the Big Apple Circus from New York to come and perform, which I thought was a brilliant idea because it's family centric. And my job as one of the people on the marketing committee was to help get the word out about it. So even though we were really selling tickets to the Big Apple Circus, when I began thinking about it, it became clear to me that what we were really selling was this. And who doesn't like to have fun? Now, when I mentioned what we're going to be talking about in this presentation, one of the things I referenced was guerrilla marketing. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that term. If you're not, guerrilla marketing, like guerrilla warfare, is when you don't have a big enough army to fight someone. You have to get creative with how you do it. And the same thing with marketing. You have to come up with ideas that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, but are ways to get people's attention. So since we were selling fun and we were talking about the circus, I did a little research online and found out that for really cheap, you could buy a bunch of these. In case you don't know what that is a foam clown nose. So I discussed it with the people on our committee and convinced them to order 3,000 of these things. I think they cost about, came down to a cost of maybe 2 cents a piece, something like that. And the promotion was a little card that informed people they could get $5 off the ticket price to the Big Apple Circus. And we put them in these little packages. And then we got a bunch of high school kids who were willing to look a little foolish for a few hours and put one of these clown noses on their face and wander around downtown Stanford and the Stanford Mall and start handing these things out to basically everyone, but especially people who had kids. And that was one of the ways we introduced this. And one of the benefits of doing something a little bit out of the box is that you can, if you're lucky, get a little press on it. And we did. We got some press in the local papers and local TV channels who thought this was kind of a fun idea. I don't know if you guys know, but one of the first things I learned when I moved to Stanford is that our city has the dubious honor of being the place where Jerry Springer has his TV show. So everyone in Stanford knows that. I thought about that idea and decided to come up with this ad, which announced the date of the event in the park. And of course, Jerry Springer had a good enough sense of humor to be willing to do a little photo op. And we sold out like in a week. I'll talk about a few of the ads I've been involved with, and whether it's an ad or really any kind of marketing or advertising communication. One thing that is very important when you're putting it together is that it's not just what you say, it's often how you say it that's going to get people to respond or not. So here are a few examples of what I said and how I chose to say it. Starting with a print ad campaign, ran in a magazine called Scholastic, which I think was distributed to pretty much every high school in the country. And they wanted our agency to come up with ideas that would convince high school students not to drop out of high school. And one of the facts I was working with is that high school graduates make more money than high school dropouts. So just using that simple fact, my task was to come up with a way to say that. And I figured, well, maybe one thing that could get their attention is if I found a picture of a $500 bill and featured that $500 bill in the ad and said this. The simple copy at the bottom says high school graduates make more than high school dropouts, and that's a fact. And the tagline simply says it pays to stay in school. So it's important to know your audience. And I don't think there's anyone that doesn't respond to more money. Another strategy is humiliation. And I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Let's see, the next campaign was for organ donation on subways of New York, a subway poster. And I will read the copy because if you're sitting on a subway and you see that ad, you're probably going to want to know what the heck that means. And the copy said, on August 29th, 1998, Bill Jackson was killed in an auto accident. Hours later, 14-year-old Lisa Kelly had a life-saving operation, a liver transplant. But what really saved her life was the decision by Mr. Jackson to be an organ donor. Thanks to that, a young life was saved. And then, of course, the phone number that you could call and get more information. Another organization we worked with was a League of Women Voters, and the goal here was to get people to get off their butts and vote. So this was something that ran a week or two before the election day. I'm not even sure what election it was, but it was long ago enough where a newspaper was still something that people read. So we did a spread in a newspaper that simply said, if you don't vote, you may regret it for days, and then listed every day for 4 years. And the tagline, which you can't really see, gives people a way where they can register to vote if they're not already registered. Because I have the time, I'm always interested in coming up with ideas for things that I think are important. And one of the things that I think is very important is healthy eating. I've recently educated myself about that and have switched to mostly a plant diet. And when I talk about it with a lot of my friends, they say, oh, yeah, I know fruits and vegetables are better, but, it's just so expensive. It's really more expensive to eat vegan. So, I don't want to spend the extra money. And that's simply not true. So here's the ad I came up with, again, appealing to people's pocketbooks. And the copy says, contrary to popular belief, a healthy plant-based diet is less costly than a meat-based or fast food diet. Multiple studies show that over time, a vegan diet will save you and your family thousands of dollars. And that doesn't even include the medical bills you'll save. To learn more about the many benefits of a vegan diet, visit. On to child abuse. Child abuse became a thing with me when I stumbled on a PBS special years ago that was talking about Adolf Hitler. I knew a lot about Hitler, but one thing I didn't realize until watching this documentary was that Hitler, as a child, was severely abused on a regular basis by his father, which makes sense when you think about it. And being the advertising guy I am, my reaction was, somewhere in here is a good ad for child abuse prevention. So in thinking about it, I concluded that if a guy like Hitler was abused as a kid, maybe some of the other villains and criminals throughout history also had abuse in their lives. And these are the four that I found. Then the question became, okay, so what's the ad? I wasn't sure what the headline would be, but I decided that the tagline talked about the fact that you don't have to be an abusive parent to be concerned about child abuse. You don't even have to have kids to be concerned about the issue of child abuse, because your life, realize it or not, may be affected by someone who was abused as a child. So child abuse, whether you're a parent or an abusive parent or not, is something you need to be concerned about. And the tagline for that was child abuse, it hurts all of us. So that was the tagline. Then the question became, okay, what's the headline? And it took me a while to come up with it, but I finally did. And the headline was, some abused children grow up to become famous. And the copy, abused children grow up to become abusing adults. Not in every case, but in too many. Over 80% of criminals suffered from abuse as a child. So did the people pictured above. If you want help or want to learn more, call and then the number for the organization. With the tagline, child abuse, it hurts all of us. Now, the real big opportunity we had when I had my agency was this national TV campaign of commercials that we were invited to do. And what was exciting about that, because most nonprofit organizations don't have any money, what was exciting about that was that this national organization made friends with the NBA. And the NBA decided it would be good PR for them if they were associated with this cause. So they decided that they would be willing to donate $5 million worth of their TV time during the NBA playoffs. This was in 91. So $5 million in 1991 could be worth $10 million today. Who knows? Now, the NBA would have been fine with getting one of their players reading a script off a teleprompter with a little child sitting on their lap. We weren't going to do that. We weren't going to do that because we were a creative agency. We also felt that not only did we want to showcase our creativity, but more importantly, I just felt that no one responds to boring advertising. So I told them that we were not going to do that. If they wanted us to work on the campaign, they would have to accept the fact that we weren't going to do that. They paused a little bit, looked at one another, and finally said, okay. So I tried to figure out how I could make a logical connection between basketball and child abuse. And whenever you're talking about pretty much any public service cause, it's an emotional issue. And if you don't do something that connects the viewer on an emotional level, the message you're trying to communicate is just not going to resonate. So my challenge was how do I connect with viewers of basketball games on an emotional level to this cause? And I thought, well, what if I try to do something from the kid's point of view? A kid who maybe is experiencing abuse. So the idea I came up with was, what if I had a little kid, he's by himself late at night with a basketball on a basketball court shooting baskets. But the reason he's there by himself late at night is not because necessarily he wants to get better at basketball, but because he's afraid to go home. So the actual line that I came up with was, the reason Robert isn't going home is not because he doesn't want to be beaten on the basketball court. It's because he doesn't want to be beaten at home.
The reason Robert isn't leaving is not because he doesn't want to be beaten on the basketball court. It's because he doesn't want to be beaten at home.
So as you see, it's a very simple spot to produce, and it's a very simple message. But my hope was that that would touch people on an emotional level. Another idea I came up with, in trying to somehow equate some basketball-related things to child abuse, was thinking about how monstrous these players are, right? These guys are huge, and if you or I were standing next to any of them, especially someone who's over 7 feet, it would look something like this. Well, interestingly, that's exactly what it would look like to a little kid who's standing next to his father. Pretty intimidating if you're a little kid, right? So my idea was, well, what if you get a 7'2" basketball player and you start the camera at his feet and you just slowly crawl up his body for the first 10, 15 seconds. The spots were 30-second spots. So for the first half of the spot, all you see is the camera crawling up his body. You don't know why until finally, when you get to his face, he leans into the camera, looks right at you and says, if it makes you nervous to have someone my size in your face, now you know how your kid feels when you're in his.
If it makes you nervous to have someone my size in your face, now you know how your kid feels when you're in his.
So those spots ran very heavily during the playoffs. And a month after they did, the 57% national increase was a result of people seeing these spots and then getting their phone books and finding the National Child Abuse Hotline on their own and making calls. And that's how they measured it. They measured it by the response rate to the National Child Abuse Hotline that anyone could call with an 800 number. And then about 6 months later, I got this in the mail to come to a White House reception. I think at the time, George Bush was talking about his 1,000 points of light, about the call for people to get involved in public service. And I guess I was one of those points. So that was a real honor and certainly one of the highlights of my career. One of the things I'm been doing now, it's kind of an ongoing project. I want to talk about it because it deals with more current media, video and social media. And I came up with this idea a few years ago. I just decided, I've been reading a lot about kids getting bullied, and I used to be bullied as a kid. So it was a cause I wanted to try to do something about. So I wrote a couple of scripts for videos. I thought what would be effective about these if I could get kids to read these scripts, because I felt the best way to get kids to reconsider bullying was to hear messages from other kids. So the idea was to write a script that could be read by a bunch of kids. And the basic message is that to these kids was, if you see something, don't ignore it. Because I feel that the most effective way is for kids, other kids, to stop other kids from bullying. So here's one of the scripts that says, if you see a bully picking on someone or some girls, any girls doing something mean to another, it's not easy to say something. It's not easy to do something. It's not easy to tell someone, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. So I thought, gee, maybe there's some local drama schools that have aspiring young actors and actresses. And I found one in Westport and one in New Rochelle. And I was able to get a bunch of kids who were willing to read these scripts. And I will show you what we ended up with.
If you see
a bully picking on someone,
or some girls, any girls,
being mean to another,
it's not easy to say something.
It's not easy to do something.
It's not easy to tell someone.
but that doesn't mean
That doesn't mean you shouldn't.
when you see a bully picking on someone, it might be easy to think it's no big deal.
It might be easy to say, whatever.
It might even be easy to go along or laugh.
Well, bullying is not okay.
It messes kids up. Bad. So just because doing nothing might be easy,
it doesn't mean it's the thing to do.
So when I talk about touching people on an emotional level, that's what I mean. These kids were great. I was hoping that if I figured out how to get exposure for these, that could really have an impact on the issue of bullying. So the question then became was, how do I get the message out? And as you saw, as a tag for both of those spots, I referenced a Facebook page. So I called it the Bully Video Project, and I put up a page on Facebook, which is a very easy thing to do. And my thinking was to direct kids, to this page where if they were interested, they could access the scripts that I wrote, and using their iPhones or their iPads, and getting their friends together, they could essentially recreate their own spots using my spot as a model. And if they did that, then they could, of course, all their friends would be in the commercials, and then that would get all of them excited, and that would get their parents excited, and that would get their teachers excited, and maybe we could get some politicians excited if we got some schools to do this, and maybe we could have some friendly competition between schools, because if one school started doing this, maybe, and they got a little positive press from the local media, of course, the other schools will want to jump on board with that. Maybe if we got a few schools, maybe we get the whole state to do it. And if we got the whole state to do it, maybe we could get the nation to do it. So that was my idea. This is what I posted on the Facebook page, which basically is a step-by-step explanation of how you can do it. Unfortunately, it didn't really take off the way I had hoped. It was a little bit more ambitious, I think, than I thought. I mean, kids are smart, especially with digital media. So I thought that, there might be a few kids willing to do this, but I realized afterwards that it probably requires some adult supervision, maybe someone in an academic circle with the district schools, or even just one school, to embrace this idea and help make it happen. Because I think if I had some assistance from some academic or civic leader to help make this happen, then it would gain some momentum with other schools. So that's something, even though I started this years ago, that's something I just do not want to give up on. So again, if any one of you listening has any thoughts about that, I will include my email at the in the chat box. Feel free to reach out to me because I still think there's potential to make this happen. Ian Nyberg, news reporter for Channel 8 News, thought it was a pretty good idea because she had me on her program a few years ago talking about it, kind of a Charlie Rose-like studio setup. So it was a great opportunity to talk about that. And we even got some press. So again, I think it's a good idea. I just perhaps need a few of the more missing pieces to make this come together. So that's the presentation.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Thanks for sharing. It's great seeing how creative juices work.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
My pleasure.